I'm Neal KUSHWAHA, that's my name actually, and I enjoy doing some work on this particular behavior of cyber and the international behavior and how we deal with it. And more I'm learning about it. I'm learning about different things, and specifically into the law. And I'm just going to hold the mic. Is that cool? Yeah, no loud for me. So I'm going to talk about something interesting that I find interesting, which is cyber sovereignty. And I'll explain all this stuff for those of us that just set a baseline, those of us who don't appreciate law and international law or international humanitarian law or the law of our conflict even. So I'll make sure there's a baseline, and we'll play some games and scenarios as to where Canada stands, or where does a particular country stand in a particular case as it plays out. And I've got some really interesting thoughts. Just came back from Tallinn as well, discussing on the cyber law. So there's a whole track of work under the CCDCOE, which is the Cyber Defense Center of Excellence at NATO. And there's a whole track on that we discuss cyber law as well. So if you need to step out and grab a coffee because law is boring, that's cool. You're not going to offend me. Coffee folks are just right outside there, and they're willing to make whatever you need. So, and freshly ground, and freshly, not just ground, what is it? Roasted beans. That's what it is. Okay, so let's jump into this thing here. So I'm just going to really highlight here what this is, and if you can read all this stuff, I'm not going to read it out to you, but basically there are international obligations for each country, or each state, as I'll use the word. You can take a photo of this if you like. It's fully available. I'm not going to slide something else on there. There's the use of force, the prohibited intervention, and due diligence, and violation of sovereignty. So I'm just going to explain each one of them really quickly. The use of force, it's very simple there. You can use force against someone or another state, if they're using a particular force against you. You can't go crazy and apply a different level of force. You have to use some common measurable level of force. And then the prohibited intervention, you can't go around messing around with other countries' state affairs. That's not correct. No matter whether you do that in cyber or whether you do that in human methods, it's just not correct. And I'll get into some cases on that as well. Due diligence, if someone's doing something in your country, you have an obligation to stop them. As your state operators, as a government of state, you have an obligation to stop that noise or traffic or mess or behavior. Okay? Due diligence. Cool? And then there's sovereignty. It's really interesting. So, you know what? Before I actually jump ahead, let me just see if this works here. There we go. Here. Activity must breach international law. So in this case here, state or non-state actors through a state, let's say Canada, cause harm to state B, let's say our neighbors in the United States. And that's an interesting situation, because I said state or non-state actors. So technically there's a gap between that, non-state actors. What if I'm just a vigilante in my country behaving badly? Does that count? Not exactly. You have to be an organ of the state, and I'll explain what organ of the state really means later on. We have Dr. Tassilo Singer, who just stepped in. He's probably gonna beat me up with questions later, but I'm trying to make this a simple session on law, not a detailed. He's gonna get into some really interesting thoughts on the German side as well. So let's talk about the violation of sovereignty, what sovereignty really is. So what is sovereignty? And I think anyone that talks about sovereignty is gonna bring up the island of Palmas here, and I'll let you read it if you like. You can take a photo of it if you like. That is really where the idea of sovereignty comes out. And sovereignty of a state. So you and I don't have sovereignty rights. The states do. A nation state does. And that's where this sources from this scenario, from this case here in PCA and the island of Palmas. So if I move forward, just to describe what it really means, it really only applies to a nation state. And there are a few ways to violate it. Just technically there's only two ways, really two reasonable ways to violate it, multiple ways within that. But you step onto their territory, make a mess, you're stepping into their space, their sovereign space, you do something, you have violated their sovereignty. Second is, you mess with their governmental affairs. And that's a legal term up there, in inherently governmental functions. You start playing around in that space, you have busted the sovereignty. Okay? So far so good? Okay. So if I move ahead, what can you do if somebody does that? These are your response actions. You can do countermeasures. We love the word countermeasures in IT. We apply that word so loosely and dangerously in IT that, oh, we'll just do countermeasures. They did a cyber event, we'll do countermeasure. What does that really mean under law? What can we do and what shouldn't we do? And that's really what I'll get into briefly here. The plea of necessity, self-defense, and retort. Those are your kind of 4 options that you can apply under law when somebody does a breach of sovereignty. So it got me thinking. Let's say an example here, state A, sovereignty of data. So I'm hosting my stuff in a cloud as a government organization, because I'm a state. We're worried about state sovereignty. I'm hosting my stuff in the cloud, and my infrastructure for cloud is hosted by a company in the United States. So my equipment's in the state, my ICT is in the States, but my data is also on their equipment in the States. But it's my sovereign data. Okay, this is really weird, because the sovereignty of the state, if somebody, state C, comes in and messes with my data, it's in the United States, but it's not United States sovereignty. It's Canadian sovereignty of data. That's a really weird mess. And the states yet have to play out, and I don't mean the United States when I say states throughout this whole presentation, states yet have to play out the legal outcome of that type of scenario. We don't know what's going to come out. We want to see what precedence comes out of that. It's a really interesting point. And then state A performs remote cyber ops on state B. That's pretty obvious. You're stepping onto my sovereignty by doing a remote cyber operations, and it depends what you do. So I'll get into that as well. So what about copying data, encrypting data? Well, it's technically like espionage, and if you're only doing temporary with encryption, it's arguable that you're really not doing anything bad or unexpected. You're temporarily encrypting my data, and I lost access to it, but it comes back. You're impacting my functions. It could be argued, but would you really go to international court for that? Or would you use some other method of possibly retort? Go up to them and say, listen guys, I know you messed with me, fix it. Or listen, we'll deal with it another way. And there's some negotiation going on. And then what about permanently altering? Well, permanently altering is definitely a violation. And impacting government operations, we already talked about that, that's definitely violating. And then there's this one, in response to a cyber ops from state C to state B. So back to our example up there, what if I, in Canada, as if I was responsible, or we are responsible for Canada, our data is on the United States ICT in their hosted environment, and state C, let's pick another funny state that we love to pick on, like China, or North Korea, or Russia, or Venezuela, is coming into the United States causing harm on our sovereign data, located physically in the United States. Can we then go directly and deal with our sovereignty to the United States using the cyber operations to the United States on their equipment that's causing harm to us? That's an interesting situation. It's a very interesting, because it's my sovereignty of data, not ICT. It's their ICT, my data, our data, it's part of it. So I'm going to keep an example here. I like to use examples because it helps me think as well, and I like fun little pictures because it hopefully keeps you guys awake, especially in this fabulous topic of law. So there's nothing else that's going to be on here. You can take a picture of this if you want to for a sense of the case, or this particular case. But let's say state A or Canada is noticing irregular behavior from Russia and some type of cyber interference, we call it. And it's messing with our inherent governmental functions. So we obviously know that is bugging our sovereignty, right? We're clear with that. That's messing and stepping onto our sovereignty. It's impacting, let's say they do a denial of service to our tax, ability to collect tax. That's done, right? It's a very simple case. They've messed with our law enforcement, possibly by taking down an automatic botnet infrastructure that we have in Canada that responds to challenges that we see on Facebook or Twitter, and they've taken that down. They're implying their law enforcement on our sovereignty. They can't do that. Well, they can, but they should not do that. And then they're messing with our ballot counting, let's say, for example, machines. There's just another example here that I threw in there, and an extra bracket, sorry about that. So obviously in this example, it's crystal clear that they stepped over into our sovereign space. There's no doubt. Okay, so that's a really simple example. Let's talk about the attribution. We talk about attribution like who did it? I know who did it. It's always this country or it's that country. None of us are going to run around, I use this term quite often, the byword market naked, saying for darn sure, I know without a shadow of a doubt, it was this country's state actor who did this. Most of our intelligence data says there's a high likelihood. There's a strong potential for. There is and they use these terms, kind of scapegoat terms, so that we're not locked into a position to say for certain, we know for certain that this company. Even when we get data from, like, say, for example, public sources like Mandiant, Microsoft, or all these other companies that do their own research into who did what, when they respond back, there's a high likelihood. Because you don't want to hang your hat on that and get sour. So here, we need to meet a legal standard, and this is really what it comes down to. I'm hoping you guys have had a chance to digest some of this. The term organs shows up here, and no, we're not playing music. And no, I'm not harvesting anyone's organs. These are organs of the state, in the sense that if the government has given the authority for someone to behave a certain way on behalf of the government, they're an organ of the state. Really simple. If in some way the government decides, like, so you behave on your own, and the government says, you know what, I'm not going to deal with that. Why? For whatever reason. I'm not going to deal with that politically, I'm not going to deal with that legally, we're just going to ignore it. It could be also considered that because the government didn't do anything on your criminal behavior, that you could be also considered an organ of the state. And there's examples of that I can, so it's really complicated. So what I'm getting at is when states start selectively applying law, it really complicates things. It really complicates things for the state itself and other states when they look at us. Okay, so far so good? So, as you can see here, there's some text that I use that's naming and shaming. It's not my words, obviously, but it's words that's used quite often, like, haha, we know you did it, I'm not taking you to court, but we know you did it, so we're gonna let you know. That's it. Name and shame. It's a fun thing to do. Some people like to do it in the office. You can retort with a punch in the face, I guess. All right, nobody's laughing. And then you see here instructions or directions or control versus the behavior of a non-state actor. So you can think about that too. It's like, how's that going to work? And how does that apply? So let's just go back to these concepts of response. I told you, I promised you I'd talk about the response, what that really means. So countermeasure, when we use it and abuse it in IT, we say, oh, we'll just do a countermeasure. And yes, that's a full slide. Countermeasure, read that. If you read it carefully, it's technically an unlawful event that you are doing because someone else has done an unlawful event. And you are allowed to do a certain level of countermeasure. You can't just go and do countermeasures because you're having fun in technology and you want to self-police. Okay? So we abuse that term countermeasure in IT very often. Oh, we'll just apply some countermeasures. What the hell does that mean? And countermeasures drive countermeasures, which drive more countermeasures, which drive more countermeasures. And all you see is this escalating situation. So I put that up here because I'm born from IT as well, and I suffer from this problem of IT has this self-policing attitude. You know, somebody's sending me garbage emails from their mail server, and you know what? I'm going to blacklist them, self-police. I'm going to let all my friends know who also use this mail server service that they're all blacklisted. Guess what? And they have to go and self-remove them from that blacklist. Self-policing. I'm very, very polluted in my head with that. I have to step out of it because what's allowed under law. Plea of necessity. If I know for sure I need to do this because there's no other choice, I can apply or a state can apply plea of necessity. Self-defense. I know Tassino's going to talk about this in Article 51 UN Charter. It has to do with the use of force. So somebody has, in this case, a cyber operation. What can you respond with? Technically, you could respond with a use of kinetic force. And to the United States, most of us in the world say this, you know, it's kind of only grave use of force are for armed attacks, but US considers any behavior an armed attack, which makes it really complicated internationally. So if you behave over cyber in the United States, they could consider it an armed attack and respond accordingly. That's their choice. And then obviously retort. Retort's probably the most common use. Like, I'm going to expel your diplomats, I'm going to close some waters, I'm going to stop blah, blah, blah trade. You see that all day. So that's a really simple one to do, and it's probably the most common one that's used. Yes, we can say you did it. Am I going to take it to international court? Probably not. Hey, you know what? Next time we travel over to this country, maybe get them to do something for us that we need done here because we know they did it. At the end of the day, attribution is more political, is what I find. It's great that the technical folks can say for sure, without a near shadow of a doubt, remember that Byron market situation? They did it. That's what the technical response states. The legal response says that, you know, based on these cases, yes, these individuals may have done this. Here's what you can do from a legal perspective. But at the end of the day, the politician is going to take the political response because they own the responsibility for the state and say, well, you know, I'm not going to take it to court. I get that that's the case. I have no interest in doing that. I want to handle it through a retort. It's possible. So I'm going to put the GGE stuff up here. This is a very interesting thing of what's coming out of them. And so I'll just quickly read on the 24th of June there, 2013, and you can download these documents from their website, the URLs listed there. State sovereignty and international norms and principles that flow from sovereignty apply to state conduct of ICT-related activities. Interesting. Okay, that's cool. And then you can read the other ones. I'm not going to read them all for you because the purpose of this is not to read my slides. It's to kind of talk about some cool stuff. So clearly, the UNGGEs GGE is talking about sovereignty in the cyber domain, and they have certain content that they've written about this and discussed about this, and they're moving on it. So that comes up to another topic of territorial integrity and inviolability. So, are your borders inviolable? And what is a border? So we consider territorial borders, physical borders, very simple. And what about when it comes to cyber? When do these awkward cyber operations or remotely controlled cyber operations violate the target state, so if somebody came back to Canada, the target state's territorial integrity? Because that's another challenge. So we have certain thresholds of violation. If you cause physical harm, injury, death, damage, destruction, it's crystal clear that you have violated this. Crystal clear, no doubt. But what's kind of weird, and that I have a question mark there, is functional damage. ICT no longer works as intended, temporarily or permanently. Which one is it? And if it's temporary, I don't know what states are doing. I'd like to see more of what states are doing. If it's permanent, it's crystal clear. If it's permanent. But I'd like to see more of what nation states are doing on a temporary basis. And again, that's just my personal perspective. And I think certain states have a different perspective, and you'll hear that from Asha, and you'll probably hear that from Tassilo as well. And then infringement of territoriality without physical or functional damage. So I've just kind of deleted your data. I haven't injured anyone, I haven't destroyed anything. I've just, okay, that's interesting, you've deleted data. Isn't that like sabotage? I walked into your building physically and shredded some documents, or took them, stole them. So espionage and sabotage is well known, done before cyber even was in use, and it's still in use today, and cyber is just a different medium. Can we throw the laws against espionage and sabotage through cyber? Do we want to do that? Because we want to conduct espionage and sabotage operations too. And if we're under legal law, I'm thinking we're treading some really weird waters here. So that's kind of a very open space still. And then espionage to me is crystal clear. It's kind of separate from this whole mess. So then, keeping on this topic here, let's talk about this. What about close access cyber ops? I'm throwing some malware onto your system to cause some functional damage. Yes, I've caused functional damage, and especially if it's government operations, it's even more so. Causing permanent damage by overheating hard drives, absolutely. So what does that come to your mind? What about the Stuxnet causing permanent damage? That's interesting. That's a violation of sovereignty. Interesting, interesting. Okay, what about rendering the target infrastructure completely inoperable by encrypting your data? Kind of like a ransomware. Okay, so permanently versus temporary. Notice I put a question mark there. I am not responsible of the state, and nor am I giving a legal opinion. It's my personal opinion to say that I'd like to see more of what states are choosing to do on the temporary side before we can really say for certain temporary is a violation. Remotely operating inside your infrastructure, that's espionage. Implementing malware for future use, espionage, sabotage. If I start blocking that out, I don't have the right to do that either. And this is what we do. Nations do that, it's expected. There you go, so port scanning, would that be a violation? I'm just kind of poking around and looking. Better not be, exactly. He's like, it better not be because I might be seeing somebody soon. I'm just kidding.
No, it's just impossible to tell ordinary traffic. So you're asking to do the worst thing possible.
Yeah, that's a good point. So then you look at attribution. How can I point to somebody that they did it? They're the ones in action. And that's where the attribution comes back saying it's more political. It's an interesting thought. So then, we talked about the inherently governmental functions, which I said was a very distinct legal set of terms there, or legal term, sorry, words that form a legal term. And if you impact a particular state's ability to function their government, you've caused this distinct violation. So you can't mess with that kind of stuff that I've described up there. You can't interfere with our particular systems to take them down. Those are clear violations. Now, pardon me, you may not. You can, because you choose to do that. A particular state may choose to do that. But it's a distinct violation. And definitely not any usurping. So far, so good? Everyone's kind of on the same page on this baseline so far? Yay? Anyone? Okay, cool. So let's call up a scenario 2. This is a little bit more complicated. And I had a lot of time trying to draw this up because I try to make a really nice looking, hopefully, slides. And so company, we're talking a private company in Pakistan, discovers, finds, procures, and sells software vulnerabilities. And even produces some of their own for the use in clandestine methods to perform surveillance over the network, over cyber surveillance. And we're just going to call those surveillance tools. So keep in mind this is over cyber, remote operation. I'm not coming in and doing surveillance in your country with cameras or microphones in a traditional sense, risking myself. I'm doing this remotely into another country over cyber. Okay, so they have this capacity, a particular company in Pakistan. And I'm picking up Pakistan, you'll see why later on. And this company has sold their tools to state B. Now this is a real case, but not the same countries. I know Tassilo is smiling because he's going to figure this out really quickly. But okay, so company has sold their stuff to another country, a state, a government, to perform surveillance on their own people and their people living abroad. Where do we sit on law? This is a really interesting problem. The company then gets hacked by an anonymous group, which also legitimately happened, and they said, hey, by the way, we're exposing you guys. You had dealings with State B and negotiated some monies and blah, blah, blah. You sold your stuff to them, and we're exposing you. Okay? And then Pakistan then says, yeah, that's great, but that's not really unlawful under our country, so we're not going to take them to court. We're not going to take this to criminal proceedings. So that's a legitimate scenario. I've used totally different countries. If you guys are familiar with these kind of cases, this is a moment to take a photo of this case. This is a really complicated case. So, anyone want to give a try? Like, besides Tassilo, sorry buddy, because this is too easy for you, as to what you think might apply as to what we discussed on sovereignty.
In what way would this be substantially different than, in your case, Pakistan selling weapons that are bought by Congo and those weapons are used by Congolese agents in another country? Nobody would go to Pakistan and say, this is your fault for selling weapons that have done physical damage. So I'm just kind of curious.
Absolutely.
Do you see the same?
I do, because it's a company.
Okay, well,
It's not Pakistan as a country, it's a company causing this scenario. So this scenario makes it really complicated. I'm a little company, I like to collect, maybe in the 80s I was collecting viruses for fun, and now I'm collecting surveillance tools and functions. I've written some to perform these jobs in a clandestine way. If I did that in Canada, that's unlawful.
So Joe's machine gun shop.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm just curious as to why this would be different.
You're right. And it is slightly different because we have the Western Convention on arms sales and trade, trade treaties and a variety of different things. I think in this case here, you can sell this. We have no visibility as to what you've done online. I can pay you over PayPal, you can transfer this over wire. Nobody has any visibility, there's no control, there's nothing. No arms trade treaties, nothing. It just happens. And it's very complicated for states to manage. So it does pose a problem. There's some similarities, absolutely correct, but it is still complicated. Yeah?
In this case, what are in the actual case, the company that sold the weapon, the cyber weapons to Congo, actually was some of the employees and also the money they got from the state, they actually part of the state. So there was no way the state was running around and saying, well,
you got an interesting point. There's no evidence that says that. I don't see that evidence. What I'm presenting is this case. We can ascertain or surmise that there may have been state involvement, there may not have been, but there's no distinct evidence of that that's being presented to us in this case. We just know the company did it, they amassed some stuff. So let's try and dissect this thing. Let's say, for example, maybe state is performing, maybe state B, let's look at state B first of all, because the Congo scenario is really interesting. Maybe they're performing security policing. Maybe it could be interpreted as. And in which case, like, maybe their actions are justified. Maybe. And it's equivalent to espionage against your own people in your country and out of your country. And that's really about your laws, right? Your behavior under your country. Are you allowed to spy on your own citizens in your own country? I don't know. I don't know how the Congo applies. And this is the crazy Congo, not the neighboring reasonably friendly Democratic Republic of Congo. This is the whack job Congo, sorry, if anyone's recording this. But there are different views on this matter, especially if the country's under, say, UNSC embargo. That makes another problem there, or adds some complexity. But I think as long as state B isn't messing with those, say, South Africa's, Liberia's, and France's sort of other nation states' cyber infrastructure specifically, it's going to be an interesting case. Yeah, I'm not certain. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, regularly, France will protest if it's publicly, and they will say, like, hey, Congo, you shouldn't do it. Then Congo will say, well, we're justified because of national security, that's a big card. But then France regularly would say, okay, if it's a national security issue for you, you need to cooperate, send your officers to France, and we conduct it together. If Congo does not cooperate, they violate due diligence obligations, cause no harm, because of cooperation, and then you got them.
So he's just unraveled the whole scenario here. So the scenario is really, it's quite political, quite legal, and less technical. And we play in this domain of cyber saying, oh, you know what, I know the attribution, I can point to them, I can deal with this, and clearly we know exactly who it is. That's nice, but maybe that's not the way it plays out at the end of the day. So let's just talk about the other side. Pakistan says, hey, you know what, those are not really our laws. We don't consider that criminal. That's another problem. Yes, you're doing this, you're selling this, that's great, the company's doing that in my country. So have Pakistan done something interesting? Are they ratified with, say, the Convention on Cybercrime? I'm not sure where they stand today, I actually didn't look that up. But if they are, they would have to abide by that and apply due diligence on their country to say, listen, you have the responsibility to stop these guys from selling this and doing this behavior. You did not. And there could be applied due diligence upon that. And that's another scenario that can play out. And because they're saying, like, you know what, this whole behavior of what you've done, the right to produce, sale, procure, whatever of these kind of so-called surveillance tools, you know, you were supposed to handle that, and that's not allowed. So why didn't you handle that? Why didn't you take them to criminal proceedings? Why didn't you were responsible somewhat there?
But isn't there a perfectly legal reason for them to have those tools, protect themselves?
A company?
testing their own security mechanisms.
Company can have those, maybe some of those tools, but I would say covert is the word that's applied there. Or sorry, clandestine, not covert. Clandestine is a different term in the industry. You're doing that kind of without trying to be noticed. You're doing that in a near borderline illegal method. Yeah, so yeah, you can have certain tools, and just because it's available, I could buy them or I could have them, but should I use them?
It comes down to attribution again, right? So if you can't do true attribution, the government procured the tools, that's one segment, the other one is the clandestine activities. You can't connect the two of them necessarily because...
Yeah, you'd have to have evidence for that, but definitely the company doing that is extremely horrible behavior. And that behavior falls upon Pakistan's due diligence to handle that. And it's a very interesting play, so then how would Canada handle that? So somebody in Canada is collecting, Kerry's probably got a company collecting some software, and I'm just kidding, some tools, and you know, maybe he's thinking about selling it, maybe not. What's Canada's responsibility on due diligence? It's his behavior.
How is that different from the control medication? The state will control the dosification of drugs that we use. Most products should be controlled by the state that way.
Yeah, I think there's a difference with that. Is there a difference between, say, for example, he used the word, let's say, drugs, controlled substances. But there's laws around that. There's behavior around that that's well-defined, to some degree, reasonably defined. I won't say well-defined. I think when we classify cyber weapons as weapons, different states apply different terms to the term weapons. An international term, weapon, or a firearm, or something like that, has a very distinct legal term. And that's what I talked about last time, was the impact of cyber weapons in the US Constitution. Where does this go? Where are we going with this thing? And how does that impact Canada? This is really about, okay, this is a scenario. So we often think in an entrepreneurial mode here. Maybe I could write some tools. Maybe I could sell some tools. Maybe I could be, interested in selling some tools online. Maybe. But what's the state's responsibility? Go ahead.
In my opinion, this becomes just a political question and a question of political power, because if you just change the scenario and say, like, France is selling this stuff, and they say, well, it's our sovereignty, it's our companies produce this to secure our IT companies and other companies. In Europe, if someone bad buys it, we cannot know. It becomes a question of political strength. And so if Pakistan is able to enforce any due diligence obligation of France, it might be an issue, but if not.
That's right, and that's where it comes back down to my statement earlier. Technically, we can do all the attribution data, saying, oh yeah, we got the logs, we got the IT logs, and it's this. And then legally, experts can say, okay, based on this attribution and these activities, we think you have justification with international court here on this matter, on this matter, on this matter. We can take this standard, this standard, that standard. We can do this. But then really, it's all political at the end of the day. It's all political.
Hold on a second. I'd like to ask you something that you seem to have said once and then dropped, which makes a difference to me as a security practitioner. Somewhat. I'm not sure what the difference makes, but I'm thinking about it. You mentioned both deliberately crafted malware and earlier exploitation of existing applications and harvesting of vulnerabilities. There may be, in some contexts, maybe an obligation to report those rather than exploit them.
Your interesting point there. I'm more leaning on the sovereignty side of this. So when somebody behaves that way against my state, where I reside, I would prefer to protect my state. And I get that there's a corporate responsibility of someone designing the software.
You have a legal responsibility,
But that's within my country's legal confines.
From the EU, at least, that you may eventually have the obligation to report.
That's a good point.
Maybe this is future science fiction at present, but a future state may say, you discovered a vulnerability in software, you are now legally obligated to report it in this way for some sanction. As not a security practitioner, this is where the NSAs of the world and the CSECs get in our way sometimes because they're using these things to protect us, they say, and yet not
Amy, I mean, I'm not going to speak to that particularly. That's an interesting point. I just find it's extremely difficult to manage that reality in law. I'm using law because people are behaving unlawfully on borderline, and you're trying to manage it using, it's complicated. But it is an interesting point to what degree the nation state applies responsibility onto corporations. And if that corporation is not even in your country and you're using their software, how do you apply your sovereignty, your laws on some other country's entity is probably the right term as a company. It's really complicated. I'm sure maybe Tassilo, you can bring something up in your presentation around that concept there with how Germany deals with it and explain some of the complexity there. I'm going to just keep running forward. This is DoD's statement on remote operations. It's a very interesting statement to me. They're saying that definitely anyone behaving in this way of stepping on my sovereignty or territory, it's clearly been violated in a cyber, and we're going to deal with it as an attack. Wow, and look at the date on that. It's a very interesting statement. And I'm summarizing this, please, I'm trying to rip through this. So let's just quickly look at some of the history of law and judicial outcomes here specifically. Lotus case, Turkey and France, clear case, sovereignty applies, and that's probably the most common one, first one. And I'm not going to get into that because I know Tassilo's going to talk about it as well, because we all do whenever we talk about law and sovereignty. The Corporate Channel, UK warship sweep for mines in Albania, clearly violated sovereignty. Would you guess that? Court says you clearly violated sovereignty. Nuclear test, French radioactive fallout over Australia's airspace, violation of sovereignty by ICJ. Nicaragua, US goes and plays a little bit stupid in their country, does a whole bunch of different things, plays a bunch of operations, remote operations, training guerrilla wars, and you know what? Nicaragua complains. Court rules, violation of sovereignty. Interesting. Okay, let's move forward. Other judicial outcomes that are very interesting to Eichmann is a really interesting one. Israel goes out and picks up a war criminal, abducts him out of Argentina. ICJ says, that's a violation of sovereignty. Goes to the District Court of Jerusalem, and they also say it's a violation of sovereignty. Very interesting. Cosmos, this is a Canadian case. A Russian satellite kind of gets destroyed above our Canadian space and is raining down over Canada, and they're saying, wait, that's radioactive material, and you're violating my sovereignty, I don't like this. Sure enough, Canada gets granted, it is a violation of sovereignty. US, two planes collide in air around near China, military plane, sorry. US immediately does an emergency landing into China, and China claims, you have breached my sovereignty. And US says, you know what, you're right, I did, but I have a special exemption under rule of distress. Okay, fair enough. So when that original case was written, you can have exemptions, was also written, and exemptions would be specifically described. This is one of those exemptions. Similarly, US does drone strikes from 2004 to 2014 in Pakistan, maybe complicit, but also is complaining like, hey, you guys are violating my sovereignty, stop it. US doesn't protest, but they claim self-defense. So they're not saying we didn't violate it, we're saying we did violate your sovereignty, I'm claiming self-defense, that's what I'm doing. Very interesting. And recently, I'm sure you've heard this, a couple of little boats kind of strolled into Iranian space, physical sovereignty space, and 10 sailors were picked up, and they were videoed and showed with their arms behind their heads and whatnot, and said, you breached your sovereignty. US says, we're really sorry. Within 15 hours, case closed, apologized, people were handed over back to, yes, you breached sovereignty. What do we see in the media here? Can't believe the Iranians picked up our people, blah, 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 blah. Hey, there's law that applies. It's very interesting how the law applies and how things actually get handled politically. Okay, so those are some cases. I'm going to highlight some interesting cases really quickly here. And you can take a photo if you like, but there's a little bit more content that I'm going to just throw up very shortly. These are unique cases that everybody knows, and there you go, now the full slide is up. you can see the progression of things that are happening here. And it's very interesting to say that, pre-2008, you see a lot of denial of service behavior. Okay, that's interesting. Simple stuff, not too complicated. Then Russia's showing we are doing a little bit of hybrid warfare up to 2014, vandalizing websites, changing content. Interesting. And then in 2014, Ukrainian elections come around, you see a lot more impact of their elections, and now it's really impacting government affairs. And that's a really interesting play, but what's happening legally around it? Yeah, it's a really interesting thought. Okay, fair enough. So let's talk about what the State Department is saying, Harold Cohen. You can read that if you like, but basically saying when you play in the sovereign space, you need to consider, when you're trying to do a countermeasure, you need to consider their sovereignty as well. Okay, so they're being what seems to be very, like-minded or well-thinking for the globe. If I'm going to mess around in this space, I need to think about their sovereignty before I just mess around. But the UK's position is very, very interesting. So anyone here work with the NCSC or the GCHQ folks? Ask them where Jeremy Wright, their then Attorney General, claimed that, you know what, there is no sovereignty in cyberspace. And I don't know why they did that. And in fact, I talked to the king of law, Mike Schmidt, and he doesn't know why they did that either. It's confusing because you don't need to claim no sovereignty in cyberspace if you want to do countermeasures, because we already explained, there's measures to do that. There's 4 distinct ways that you can return some behavior back that you don't like. Legal ways. Why say that there's no sovereignty? Because once you do, you're saying there's no sovereignty. Okay, there's no sovereignty, so then you didn't do anything wrong. That's an interesting case that the UK have taken, or a state the UK have taken. So I'm just trying to surmise what I believe Jeremy's saying and what the international public believe, international law Jeremy's saying, for the UK, sovereignty is not a rule that can be violated. That means if the UK behaves a certain way, they're allowed to do it. And if somebody behaves on them, they're also saying on the cyber method, that's not a violation of their sovereignty. Okay, that's very interesting. And so you see how I wrote there, the opposite is also true, so that all kind of comes together, those 3 first bullets. And then if the UK did this for performing cyber operations, just around countermeasures, I have this statement in there that countermeasures need not be in kind. So if a country or a state doesn't have the cyber capability to respond, they can do something else. They can close their international waters. They can restrict travel. That's a countermeasure. You can play this in a different way. And then the big challenge is this last statement, which comes to my next slide. When you don't speak out and you just say, you know what, haha, you did this, I'm not dealing with it, or I'm just gonna name and shame or something to this effect, you may be seen, and I'm using the word may be seen, as selectively applying law. We already blame the Chinese. We love this sovereignty stuff. They say we love sovereignty, but when it comes to international human rights, well, maybe not so much. We selectively apply law. We blame them for that in the international community. So, here, in this case here, I know, I'm just going to throw up the picture, but the point is, in 2018, UK Cybersecurity Center says, the NCSC says, hey, Russia, bad. Clear unlawful, but they didn't say what they violated. Because they couldn't have violated sovereignty, because they just said there is no sovereignty a few months ago. So what did they do? Why bad? Why name and shame? You can't even name and shame anymore, because you have no legal basis. So state A stores data in the cloud on ICT located in the United States, and we already talked about this, but then let's say 3 other states, or even 1, tries to steal our data. So I'm leaving this up here as an example. I'm not going to dissect it in detail, but really, can Canada go to the United States and say, hey guys, it's your responsibility to fix this, and stop them? I don't know yet. I believe they can. I'm not certain that they can. Can the United States, it's not their sovereign data, they're only chasing data. Those 3 countries are only chasing the data, they're not damaging the ICT. Can those 3 countries then be harmed by the United States? It's not their sovereignty. Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know how this plays out. Can Canada say, hey, you know what? US, we're good allies. I'm gonna obviously talk to you first and say, you know, you need to do something about this. It's pissing me off. They're taking our data. It's going through your state. You need to do something. We're good allies. What can you do? They might say, well, yeah, you know, we could shut the servers off. You know, you can do that. Does that help? Because due diligence is a really interesting thing. You have to, I kind of treat it like, you know, when I go license my car, and it doesn't pass emissions, I just have to do a basic amount, spend a certain amount, and say, hey, I tried due diligence, I spent it, can you give me my license now? You just have to show that you're trying. And if you're showing you're trying, you're showing that you apply due diligence. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to make it go away. You have to apply reasonable effort. So this is a really interesting case. I don't know the answer to this case. We were sitting in Tallinn with Charles, sitting back there as well, and we were discussing this over a few tasty beverages, and kind of came up with this idea, and I don't know what the outcome is, because I'd like to see what nation states decide.
Out of curiosity, is the argument that put forward that if a country such as Canada were to allow, particularly knowingly allow its sovereign data to be stored in another country, then it has given up sovereignty on the data?
I'll say this. Estonia stores their data in what's known as a data embassy in Luxembourg. There's an agreement made between the 2 countries.
So fair enough, in that context, but if the Canadian government were to enter into an agreement with a third party.
A foreign state, yeah.
No, not a state-to-state agreement.
Oh.
I'll accept that, but let's say the Canadian government signed
Like with Amazon or Microsoft, for example.
Cloud service.
Yeah.
It just happens that cloud, perhaps not even originally, but just in any case either stores the principal copy, shall we say, or the backups in another country. Has our sovereignty over that data been lost because we are not containing it
within the space that we've agreed on? It's a very good point. It's a very good point. You know what? I will defer that to I don't know.
It's basically illegal right now.
Is it illegal?
Like, it's illegal.
Legally, or is it just not authorized by CSE?
There would be a severe, probably up to Treasury Board level sanction at least for federal government, if you're a provincial thing.
I don't know if we've written law on this when you say legally. Under what premise of law would we apply?
Policy, it's a policy.
Policy is different than law.
Yeah, but if it comes in under the Financial Services Act or something like that, wouldn't we have legal sanction because of that?
CBC's been hosting on Google for a long time. Where do you stand on that?
Well, like you, I'm not a lawyer, but I've read the Directive of Data Presidency.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem. I don't know the answer to this, but it's a great discussion to have. And it leads me into what I'm trying to say, where we're going. If you don't mind, I'll jump to the US Cloud Act. I think, they have law written on this under Code 2713. They can reach. They went to Ireland. Microsoft in Ireland had a case, Microsoft v. United States of America, saying, hey, with just a few mouse clicks, move the data, repatriate the data back into the US so we can get access to it, please. That was in court. And Microsoft says, no, we're not going to comply with that. That's crazy talk. And thankfully they didn't, but then they dropped the case and wrote this law saying, yeah, we can do it anyway. It's law now. If you operate a company in the US, so all of us were all happy. Yay, they dropped the case. That means, it's no longer precedent. They wrote law instead. They wrapped around it. So now it becomes complicated for Canada to host in the United States unless you have an agreement. And they allow for agreements, as it says in there. But they also don't say how that applies to US citizen data. And that's a complicated matter for them. EU also does something a little bit different, but basically they're saying something similar, saying we can also, but it has to be under evidence requirements for judicial reasons and court proceedings, investigations as well. ICTs are covered under sovereignty, but data sovereignty is written in the telemanual, but the telemanual isn't law, it's an interpretation, and our best in the legal industry, or legal industry of the international law, it's kind of our best understanding of how cyber would be handled, I guess, cyber issues would be handled. And it's really up to our countries to deal with it, how they intend on dealing with it, or how they tend to take it to court. I'm curious to see cases on data sovereignty. And if you know of certain cases of data sovereignty under judicial review right now, I'd love to read about it. So then, the interesting last two little things here. Private sector companies want to perform attribution, and you probably heard the digital GC, the Digital Geneva Convention Microsoft was touting, saying we want to do this, and then talking about the concept of attribution. Let's say there's the big companies of gathering cyber data. Let's say, for example, like the Mandiants and the names of these companies escape me, but they go out and say, yeah, we found the attribution, we did it, we know it's them. What they're doing, in my opinion, is taking away the state's ability to decide how they want to handle that. They are choosing to apply their attribution and say, it's North Korea, or it's so-and-so in that country, or it's Turkey behaving this way. They took away the state's ability to handle that politically. Do you see what I'm saying? I feel as though that's been done. Yes, go ahead.
How will they will be able to do this? I mean, there are no states, they don't have any legislative power,
Exactly.
national law, so...
But if they just go out there and say...
States don't have to behave according to it.
Yeah!
So,
It's almost...
but states won't.
States don't have to agree, but they will still name and shame. So if one of those really prominent companies like Microsoft says, you know what, we see the data, we clearly see it's coming from North Korea, I can't believe Canada's doing nothing about it, blah, 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 you should do something, Canada, name and shame Canada, as well as North Korea, what do you think that does to political relations? So digital GC is interesting from a privatization of governmental operations, but that's not where we want to go in my opinion. We want to leave the negotiating to the governments who have the intelligence that we don't have to make those decisions. And that's my personal opinion. So when I said attribution is almost unnecessary, technically you can go to court and say, international court, and say, listen, I've got data, attribution data, but it's classified, I can't share it with you. But I know for damn sure it's them. You might get away with it once or twice. You might have to show later on, especially if you're wrong. You have to show later on, but you can do it. So is attribution really necessary?
So are you suggesting that in situations of great import where private companies and I will put words in your mouth and say the media or citizenry knows where the fault may lie, or it has information that is germane to the situation, they should shut up and just let the politicians deal with it?
I'm not saying that in detail like that. I'm saying tell the government. Don't publicly shame. Leave that to the government. We can't let companies, or we should consider not letting companies run governmental international business.
So let's suppose the first recourse of the company, the press, the citizenry, is to tell the government, and they are unsatisfied with the government's response. What do you perceive of as the next step?
That's a great point. So if I'm unsatisfied because I told the government that my neighbor's behaving badly, the police, they're behaving badly illegally, do I then go to the press? Do I shame my country? Is that my goal? To what degree do we have the knowledge as an individual of the entire government operations and why they may have chosen this? I used this example last year saying, I go through security clearance. I get my interview done, really simple one, background check. I have a financial check, I have a psych eval, and I have a polygraph, and maybe something else. The polygrapher fails me. No problem, everyone else passes. I show up on site. Somebody approved it. Polygrapher sees me in the building and says, who the hell approved this guy? I failed him. He should not be here. This is crazy talk. I don't know which manager approved this. This is crazy, ridiculous. My work is useless, blah, blah, blah. They don't have all the intelligence. They have 1/4 of the intelligence. How can we expect companies to decide on behalf of the state?
Well,
That's just my opinion.
well, personal disclosure, I'm probably fairly right of center. Having said that, the notion that people, companies, the press, who are aware of what they perceive of as a grave injustice should essentially simply tell the proper authorities and leave it at that. Even I find that a little bit difficult to
Digest.
take as a rule of thumb.
I appreciate that we just can't be vigilantes. We can't go around, like, it's almost vigilante behavior. I agree, there's gotta be some balance. There's gotta be an opportunity. Right now, where are you gonna go to? Local police for cybercrime? RCMP, they have a division for cybercrime? Do you go to the province?
Yeah,
If
but-
it happens here? You see what I'm getting at? Every state has its challenges, and to what capacity are they prepared to investigate that, deal with that, and act on it? And to what degree do they want? Maybe they're already surveilling them, and you blew the cover. I don't know.
Well, an extraordinarily complicated, as you've said multiple times, environment. I don't know if we want to, and I don't like using extreme terminology. You know, in any scenario, you can come up with a unique person who's harmed or
Yeah.
a unique situation.
For sure.
But I think in general terms, and given that this is sort of an election scenario, this is supposed to be election security, the idea that individuals, press, corporations should completely subsume any role they have to the government and simply, like I said, I'm right of center, but I find that one a little bit
Yeah,
difficult
difficult.
to.
We can discuss this offline if you don't mind. I want to try and stick on time. I don't say you had a,
Just the only thing I wanted to add to the conversation was that, we as individual citizens have a right to voice our concerns, but at the same time, we should be a bit skeptical about having companies take that same position.
Yeah.
A corporation doesn't have rights, human beings, actual citizens do.
yeah, it's a different perspective. And also, what is their reasons? Are they in the best interest of the state or themselves in order to earn money? We have to really consider those challenges. And I find it very challenging. I'm not saying one thing's right or wrong. I think at the end of the day, we have a big challenge in front of us. And that challenge in our election security is not on the technical side. It's not on the pointing to legal challenges and what we can do. It's not on the safeguarding of that kind of legal electoral process of the ballots. It's the handling of information. What I've described are remote cyber operations, countries behaving over cyber, sharing information that could be misinformation or disinformation. Under what legal confines can we, under what legal contracts can we apply our force internationally on them and nationally, domestically upon them, is really an interesting problem. And that's really what I'm trying to highlight is, yeah, okay, so election security, I'm not so worried about ballots. What I am really worried about, what Phil discussed on, is the misinformation, the way we're getting thrown off course, and to what degree is a politician saying, you know what, that video of Nancy Pelosi that got slowed down and made her look kind of lazy, woozy, she didn't like that. Facebook decided not to take it down. Interesting. Another video that surfaced of her, which was much more flattering, which was also done through doctoring of the video, she didn't request to take it down. Because it was flattering to her. And it didn't get taken down. You see what I'm saying? The information play that really plays to what Phil said earlier is we really need to take the responsibility as citizens. Canada needs to teach the citizens and give them tools and methods and somehow help us to do it on our own. Because if we let the government do it, we're then saying, well, maybe they're teaching us and maybe they're pointing us and maybe, I don't trust them. And the other side is we need to learn how to do this ourselves.
But you have the same problem where, as the previous speaker said, there's slap jobs out there.
There are.
And unless you want to get into a full legal situation where you can't do it, they're going to do whatever they feel is necessary.
Absolutely correct. And in the whack jobs, if I may quote your coined term there, They don't have to be in Canada. And then how can we deal with it legally? And that's our problem. Anyway, I've gone over by 5 minutes, and we're diving into some fun times, but coffee and a little snack break outside, or whatever it is, juices and drinks. I'll be here to just chat, but you're more than welcome to go out and grab some beverages.